Modern maps look objective, but their power comes from hidden rules most people never notice. They do not just show the world, they organize it into something states can use. This is not only a story about paper, ink, and careful geographic measurement. It is a story about how rules turn space into something governable and scalable. Because a map without shared rules is only a picture, not a working system. A powerful map is a system that makes territory comparable across distance and institutions. And once territory becomes comparable, power can move across it much more efficiently. They helped governments tax land, armies plan movement, and merchants organize routes. Before modern mapping rules, space was described locally, unevenly, and from many viewpoints. People knew their own region through memory, landmarks, habits, and practical experience. That worked for local life, but it failed when larger systems needed consistency. A king or bureaucracy cannot govern large territory through scattered local descriptions alone. It needs a version of land that can travel back to the political center. That is where mapping rules become more important than the map itself. A powerful map must decide what counts, what gets measured, and what gets ignored. It must reduce a messy landscape into forms institutions can compare and act upon. That reduction is never neutral, even when it looks purely technical on the surface. Rules about scale, symbols, direction, boundaries, projection, and measurable distance. Those choices make maps usable across large systems, but they also shape reality. Once many people accept the same rules, a map becomes more than an image. It becomes a shared language of territory that states, armies, and merchants can use. That shared language is where modern maps gained their deepest political power. Take scale, one of the most overlooked rules in the history of mapping. Scale tells you how much of the world is being compressed onto the page. But it also quietly decides what becomes visible and what disappears from attention. At one scale, a village matters. At another, it vanishes into a tiny mark. That means scale is not only a ratio, it is a filter of importance. What the map can show clearly is easier to tax, defend, plan around, or regulate. So the rule of scale helps determine what a state can practically notice. Then there is projection, one of the strangest hidden rules in mapping history. The Earth is curved, but most maps are flat, and distortion begins immediately. You cannot flatten the world without stretching something or shrinking something else. That sounds abstract, but it changes how the world is imagined politically. Different projections preserve different truths and sacrifice different truths at the same time. One may preserve shape better, another may preserve area, another may aid navigation. That means every modern map contains choices about what kind of accuracy matters most. And once one projection spreads widely, it shapes how millions understand the world. That is hidden power because rules are strongest when they feel natural and obvious. Another rule is the grid, which seems boring until you see what it enables. Grids turn open space into reference systems strangers can use without local knowledge. They let surveyors, officials, soldiers, and engineers refer to one place precisely. Without coordinate logic, distance is harder to compare and harder to record consistently. With one, land becomes easier to measure, divide, register, and administer over time. That matters because modern government depends heavily on repeatable reference points. A tax office, railway planner, military staff, and census bureau all need them. Then there are symbols, another hidden rule that gives maps institutional force. A road is not the road itself, but a line standing in for movement. A border is not a wall across every hill, but a symbol of authority. A city may become a dot, and a capital may become a larger dot. Those symbols seem simple, but they compress huge realities into manageable commands. Compression matters because institutions cannot govern raw complexity very well at distance. They need simplified signs that allow quick comparison, planning, and official decisions. That is why symbols are not decorative. They are part of control machinery. Once a road, mountain, port, or district has a symbol, action becomes easier. And what becomes easier to act on often becomes more politically real. Boundaries are another crucial rule hidden inside modern maps and atlases. A boundary on a map looks sharp, stable, and unquestionable to the eye. But many boundaries in history were disputed, flexible, seasonal, or socially negotiated. That visual certainty changed politics because drawn borders invite administrative behavior. Once a line is fixed on a map, states tax, police, and defend it differently. The line begins shaping reality, even if reality was once far more fluid. Maps do not only reflect political order, they help produce it over time. When officials see the same boundary repeatedly, they begin governing through it. When citizens see it repeatedly, they begin imagining identity through it as well. That is why borders on maps are never just descriptive marks on paper. They are claims, instructions, habits, and mental training all at once. Orientation rules matter too, even though they feel obvious to modern users now. North at the top seems natural today, but it is still a convention. Once that convention stabilized, maps became easier to compare across regions and agencies. That consistency trained people to read territory in one dominant visual order. And when everyone learns one visual order, coordination becomes easier and faster. The map becomes more powerful because more people can read it the same way. Without consistency, every map reader must relearn the visual language from scratch. With consistency, maps become scalable tools for planning, schooling, and governance. This is why modern states invested heavily in survey systems and mapping offices. They did not just want pictures of land, they wanted standardized territorial knowledge. Standardized territorial knowledge allows roads to be planned and districts to be drawn. It lets a government compare one region against another using one spatial grammar. Once territory becomes comparable, it becomes governable in more systematic ways. Which province has more roads? Which region has less taxable land? Which border is exposed? Which river can support transport? Which district needs a school? Which town controls a route? Maps make such questions easier to ask because hidden rules make knowledge portable. Portable knowledge is one of the greatest advantages of modern administration. A local landscape is complicated, but a standardized map lets the center think quickly. That helps bureaucracies act at distance, which is central to state power. It also helps armies because military planning depends on comparable spatial information. An army does not need every tree described in words, it needs usable abstractions. Roads, rivers, elevations, choke points, bridges, and settlements must be legible fast. That is why modern warfare and modern cartography grew together so closely. The same rules that help merchants route goods can help generals move troops. The same map that helps build railways can help empires extend their control. That does not mean maps are evil, but it means they are never innocent. Their strength comes from simplification, and simplification always has consequences. What is included gains visibility. What is excluded becomes easier to overlook. A forest may become timber, a river becomes transport, a frontier becomes a line. And once space becomes an object of policy, intervention becomes easier to justify. This is also why modern economies depended so heavily on mapping systems. Markets expand when distances, land claims, and transport corridors become more legible. Investors like clarity, administrations like clarity, armies like clarity as well. Maps provided that clarity, but only because rules made information stable and shareable. Without shared rules, one map cannot connect easily to another or to institutions. With shared rules, whole systems of planning become possible across huge territories. Surveyors, engineers, insurers, tax officials, and planners can speak one spatial language. Together, those hidden rules transformed maps from drawings into instruments of organized power, letting states see territory more clearly and compare it more easily. They let commerce move with more confidence and military power move with more precision. And once space could be translated into a standardized visual system, modern power changed.